1950s, a new cultural and literary movement called the Beat Generation emerged in post-war America. The Beats, as they were called, enriched the nation's long-lived bohemian tradition with new modes of thought and literary styles. This intrepid countercultural movement of writers, artists, and free spirits rose up in reaction to rampant American capitalism, which only served to repress the true nature and beauty of human consciousness. Because the Beats believed that art was the richest manifestation of consciousness, many of them experimented with hallucinogenic drugs and Eastern meditation practices in an attempt to expand their perception and therefore improve their art. The establishment saw their unconventional behavior as a threat to the social and moral order of America. In their minds, the artistic output of the beat writers often crossed the line into pornography and therefore merited censorship. Yet those who thought that the Beat Generation was just an insignificant group of immature and eccentric bums never anticipated the effect that it would have on the cultural landscape of the 20th and 21st century. Many of their themes and concerns are still explored and confronted by contemporary writers. The events and personalities of the Beat Generation have spawned a range of successful films. The writings of Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Neil Cassidy, Gary Snyder, Lou Welch, and Gregory Corso have become significant works of literature, inspiring hundreds of poets and novelists to live and write by their example. But there is a writer who most commentators neglect to mention. An unknown novelist who published all of his work under the pseudonym Joshua Michaels. The famous Traveller's Trilogy, comprising of the autobiographical novels Beyond States, Flat Tire, and The Hitch, features some of the greatest and most profound writing of the Beat Generation. These books contain countless anecdotes and musings on the thrills and dangers of travelling across America. Allen Ginsberg speculated that these books were sacred scrolls from the anonymous messiah of the road. One reviewer even wrote that these books glowed with numinous majesty and deserved a place in the stars of the American cosmos. This unknown author never submitted his novels personally. Instead, he entrusted his manuscripts to complete strangers. These manuscripts were posted with a cover letter, instructing the recipient to deliver them to City Lights Publishing House in San Francisco. 3 different men were chosen for this task, but we only really know about the first 2, Jack Long and John Ryder. Neither of them knew anything about the true identity of Joshua Michaels. For some mysterious reason, they just felt compelled to perform a total stranger's request as faithfully as possible, especially in the case of John Ryder, who flew across America to deliver the manuscript of Flat Tire. According to eyewitnesses, the third and final messenger just placed the package containing the hitch by the door and nodded through the window, leading many to suspect that the last novel was delivered by Joshua Michaels himself. Despite speculation, the identity of this extraordinary writer is still a mystery. The prevailing conspiracy theory identifies Lou Welch as the writer of the novels, but these claims have never been proved or substantiated. As a factual documentary, this film won't lend any support to these theories, nor will it provide a brand new one. Its humble intention is to depict the story of the Joshua Michaels enigma as objectively as possible. And that story begins in San Francisco. On the 20th of September 1957, at 1:30 p.m, Jack Long, a member of the notorious youth gang The Lonely Ones, arrived at the City Lights Publishing House with a manuscript. When Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the owner of City Lights, asked who he was and what he wanted, he replied, "I am Joshua Michaels, and this is my book, Beyond States." When Ferlinghetti informed him that City Lights didn't usually publish works by unknown authors, the boy grabbed him by his collar and said that unless Ferlinghetti wanted to spend the following month walking around on crutches, he should publish the book. Ferlinghetti was stunned by this young man's panache. To avoid having his legs broken, he told Jack Long that he would skim through the book when he got home. When Jack Long returns the next day, Ferlinghetti leapt up to congratulate him for writing a book that would eventually be considered a great American novel. Long smirked and told Ferlinghetti that he hadn't written it. Joshua Michaels had. Following this revelation, Jack Long gave Ferlinghetti the cover letter he had received with the manuscript. Ferlinghetti interpreted the letter as consent to publication, and he also set up a bank account where the author's royalties would be kept, just in case the real Joshua Michaels turned up. Even now, royalties are still sent to that bank account. Beyond States was an immediate success. However, the beauty of the book was overshadowed by the story behind it. Everyone who read Beyond States was asking the same question: who wrote this incredible book? The New Yorker hired the investigative journalist Lucien Jones to get to the root of the Joshua Michaels mystery. The resultant article was inconclusive, but hinted that Beyond States may have been produced by a group of highly skilled college graduates. The book's popularity waned over the first few years of the 60s, and until 1964, most of the literary world accepted Jones's theory that Beyond States was an elaborate prank. This footage shows John Ryder, a retired accountant from Newark, standing outside the plane that would fly him to San Francisco on the 24th of August, 1964. However, this isn't just a trivial holiday movie. This film documents Ryder's journey to deliver the manuscript of Joshua Michaels' second book, Flat Tire. According to the relatives he stayed with in San Francisco, John Ryder seemed uncharacteristically troubled. One night, they heard him pacing around his room, muttering to himself. When they listened closely, they thought he was reciting poetry or verses from the Bible, but it's possible that he was reading extracts from Flat Tire. When his relatives politely questioned him about his odd behavior, he cryptically replied, "Sometimes ships sink." When Ryder turned up to City Lights Publishing House on the 26th of August, he handed the manuscript and cover letter to Ferlinghetti and said, "I think that's all I need to do." In an interview, Ferlinghetti commented that Ryder had a dazed demeanour and looked as if he had just received a death threat. In an attempt to lighten his mood, Ryder's relatives planned a road trip 2 days before he was scheduled to leave. Apparently, the trip delighted John Ryder immensely, to the extent that his brother-in-law mentioned in the police interview that it seemed as if he had snapped out of a trance. However, this happy mood was short-lived. Ryder returned to his apartment in Newark and hanged himself on the 5th of September. His brief suicide note read, "Goodbye, pork pie hat." The incident briefly spawned a murder investigation. The detective in charge was convinced that the suicide had been staged and John Ryder had actually been murdered by Joshua Michaels. But after 2 months, the investigation was closed on grounds of insufficient evidence. The publication of Flat Tire was tainted by Ryder's tragic suicide. In fact, the book received so much negative press from this incident that City Lights could only print it once. Although there is nothing in the book that would seriously upset the reader, people were reluctant to read it, just in case it affected them as severely as John Ryder. Between the years 1965 and 1967, Ferlinghetti was swamped by young authors who tried to trick him into believing that their own work was written by Joshua Michaels. Consequently, Ferlinghetti vowed to reject anyone who came to him with a Joshua Michaels manuscript. However, on the 4th of March 1969, a man wearing a blue suit and a pork pie hat walked up to City Lights carrying a package. According to the assistant on duty, Carlo Marx, the man left the package by the door, nodded through the window and strolled away. When Marx looked through the package, he assumed it was just another fake. However, the first few pages intrigued Marx, so he took it home to read that night. Ferlinghetti was woken up by his telephone at 2 o'clock in the morning. When he picked it up and asked to hear what was so important that it couldn't wait, Marx said, "I think I've just read the 3rd Joshua Michaels book." Ferlinghetti leapt out of bed and drove to Marx's house. As he skimmed through the manuscript, he asked if it came with a cover letter. Marx took it out and showed him. It was written and formatted identically to the first 2 letters, but it began, "Dear Mr. Ferlinghetti." However, if Ferlinghetti had been chosen to deliver the 3rd Joshua Michaels book, who was the man in the blue suit? Did this man know Joshua Michaels? Or was he Joshua Michaels himself? Most reviewers rated The Hitch as the best Joshua Michaels book yet. The Hitch renewed the public's curiosity about the Joshua Michaels mystery. Carlo Marx was pestered by journalists who kept asking for a thorough description of the man in the blue suit. As one could expect, this man was never found. Many people naively expected that Joshua Michaels would reveal everything in his 4th book. But by 1980, only a handful of people expected another Joshua Michaels book to appear. There had been even more fakes and frauds, but none of these imitators matched the skill and brilliance of the true Joshua Michaels. Over the decades, many people have tried to decipher his books, to extract some hidden meaning or discern a secret code that would point towards the real author. Yet in the closing paragraph of The Hitch, Joshua Michaels praises the unknown and expresses a hope that his legacy will remain unresolved. It goes, "Mysteries that exist to be solved are just manifestations of ordinary thought and knowledge. But those things that you can't simply explain, those sublime hurricanes that rip out the pages of encyclopedias, the urge to travel, that's where mysteries, and all the novels that fail to describe them, begin."